Okay, the final unit of the urinary system is how do we control it's the regulating how urine formation. You may have noticed sometimes you pee more, sometimes you pee less. Sometimes your pee is really watery, and sometimes it's really yellow and it stinks. Well, this is all because your urine is being regulated. The kidneys, the nephrons are being regulated, and they're being regulated by hormones. They're being regulated by hormones, and there are three hormones that play an important part in regulating the urinary system, and that is ADH, the anti-diuretic hormone, aldosterone, and ANH, which is atrial natriuretic hormone. Let me tell you what they do. So ADH is a big one. ADH is an important one. So if you remember from how we talked about urine formation, at the last bit here, this bit, the collecting duct, so urine is now, it's gone, all this stuff's been reabsorbed, Henle, water and sodium and stuff have been reabsorbed, histamines have been excreted. Remember, those are the things that histamines make you swell up and stuff, and the pH has been balanced here at the distal convoluted tubule with H being excreted and bicarbonate being absorbed. And so finally the urine is coming out, and we can do our last bit of control here is where we take out water or leave water in. And what we're doing by taking out water and leaving water in is we can control blood pressure. If we suck out water out of the urine and pump it into the capillaries, into that peritubular capillary network, we're going to increase the volume of our blood. And so there's going to be more water in the blood. We're going to increase the volume of the blood, and therefore we're going to increase blood pressure. So we can regulate blood pressure this way by regulating the volume of the blood. So ADH, what it does is these protein channels, there's protein channels in the collecting duct that let water out. And remember here, it's hypertonic. It's a hypertonic area here. There's a little bit of urea coming out. There's also lots of salt in here that's being actively pumped out of this ascending loop of Henle. So this is a very hypertonic environment. So water wants to get out. And if there are channels for it to get out, to go in here, because there's an osmotic gradient into the medulla, the tissue surrounding the collecting duct, and it goes into the tissue, and then it goes into the blood vessels. If those channels are open, then water leaves. What ADH does is it makes those channels. It opens those channels. So ADH opens those protein channels in the collecting duct, and water is therefore removed from the urine into the blood. The urine becomes more concentrated, so smelly, dark yellow, and the blood becomes more diluted, and the blood volume and blood pressure as a result go up. So if your blood pressure drops, that's what your body does, is it releases ADH. If your blood pressure is too low, and you reabsorb more water from your pee. But it's water, but it's been in your pee. But I guess your pee's been in your blood. Anyways, so that's one way. Diuretics like cause diarrhea. They don't cause diarrhea, but diuretics are substances, you may have heard diuretics, they increase urine flow. So alcohol is a diuretic. How alcohol works is the alcohol, when it's broken down, what it does is it inhibits your pituitary gland's ability to release ADH, because ADH comes from your hypothalamus, your pituitary, your anterior pituitary. Is it anterior or posterior? Where is it? ADH released from a posterior pituitary gland. It doesn't matter. The back pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is where a lot of stuff comes out of. And so it comes out of this pituitary gland. Your alcohol inhibits your brain, so it inhibits your ability to secrete ADH. And remember, ADH pulls water out of your urine. So now you've got more water going into your urine. You've got more water building up in your bladder. And so you're peeing more often, and your pee is more watery. It's more diluted. So, and you're probably also taking a larger volume of water in, because if you're drinking beer after beer, there's a lot of water in beer. And also a lot of water in wine. Not so much if you're doing shots. So don't, there you go. That's one of the side effects of alcohol is you pee more. And only adults are allowed to drink. I'm gonna have to cut that bit out now, aren't I? I don't have time to cut it out. Just don't drink and drive. Don't drink. You guys are almost old enough to drink. But that's what's gonna happen when you drink. Caffeine. What happens with caffeine is also a diuretic. So when you drink your coffee in the morning, you drink your venti, cargo macchiato, junquitado. When you drink those, caffeine has does a whole bunch of stuff. Your heart speeds up and this kind of thing. And so your heart is now pumping faster. And because it's pumping faster and stronger, it's increased blood pressure, which increases pressure in that glomerulus, because caffeine also opens blood vessels. So now more water is pouring into that glomerulus and into the Bowman's capsule. Now pressure filtration has gone up. So more water is leaving the blood there in the glomerulus. Do you remember the glomerulus here? Because these blood vessels are dilated, so water is, there's just more coming out. And pouring into, so there's just more water to start with, and there's so much that it can't all be reabsorbed, and out it goes, more pee. So more pee and poo from caffeine. Actually, caffeine also stimulates your bowels, so you poo more. So you pee more and you poo more. Woo! Okay, so that's what it's just diuretics. Now, another hormone is called aldosterone. And aldosterone is it's like an emergency. It's almost an emergency hormone. And it's released by the adrenal cortex. You may have heard of the adrenal gland. When something scary happens, a bear jumps out, you release adrenaline from the adrenal gland. There's the adrenal gland. It's on top of the kidney. And so it releases right into the blood, right in the kidneys, right onto that blood. It releases adrenaline, and that kicks in your nervous system into high gear, and you go into fight or flight. But also, aldosterone is released from the adrenal gland. And what aldosterone does is, if your blood pressure drops really low, what aldosterone does is here, in this ascending loop of Henle and the distal convoluted tubule, it increases this reabsorption of salt. So basically the pumping of salt out of the pee. So your pee becomes less salty. And you might say, Mr. K, how does that help with low blood pressure, having the salt be pumped out of the pee? Well, think it through. What happens is this salt, tons of salt, now this area becomes super salty. The area around this convoluted tubule is super salty. It's ultra hypertonic. So the osmotic gradient just goes right straight up, which means that in the descending loop of Henle, even more, the pressure to suck out water is greater. And same thing for the collecting duct. If you went to the collecting duct, all this is now super salty. So more water is being sucked out of your pee and being deposited into the peritubular network, into the blood vessels. So it does a similar thing to ADH, except it's doing it in a roundabout way. It's doing it by making the tissue surrounding the the tubules, the lumen, the pee, basically making it more hypertonic, so that the osmotic gradient becomes so much greater, and more water osmoses out of the pee and then goes into the blood. That's what aldosterone does. And so the instead of being in the pituitary gland or being released by the brain, it's being released here by the adrenal gland, because all of your blood under high pressure goes through the kidneys constantly. Your kidneys, I don't remember what the stat is, but it's like all your blood a few times a day goes through the kidneys. So if you want to dump something important into the blood that will spread throughout the body very fast, the adrenal gland is a great place to do it, because it's right over the kidneys. You're putting it into the kidneys. That blood is going to go through the whole system really fast. Whereas, in the brain, it's going to go, but it's got a longer route. So that's why adrenaline is in the kidneys. I'm going to ask that question on the test. Why is the adrenal gland on the kidneys? And it's just because you have access to all the blood, lots of blood. Okay, so that's aldosterone. And then finally, the third way to control the urinary system of the ones that we're learning is the atrial natriuretic hormone, ANH. And so what this hormone, it's released by your heart. It's actually released by your heart because there's another emergency. If your blood pressure gets too high. So it's atrial because it's released by specialized tissue in the atrium of the heart. Remember the atrium of the heart? You probably just wrote a test for it. We studied the heart. So the atrium, when the atrium stretch, so you have too much blood volume is too great, your blood pressure is too high, and the atria stretch, they release ANH. And ANH, what it does is this amazing thing. ANH. Let me find a good one here. Here we go. This will work. So ANH, what it does is it swells this. The afferent arteriole becomes larger. More blood, more watery blood can come into the glomerulus. But that's not even enough, because then what it does is it constricts this. The efferent arteriole closes down, clamps down. So afferent arteriole opens up, efferent arteriole clamps down. And so as a result, the pressure in here skyrockets. Because if you can imagine, you got lots of blood coming in, but you don't have so much blood coming out. It's like, I don't know, let's just, like, if I pump air into imagine my trachea is the afferent arteriole, and the air coming out of it is blood, and then my mouth is the afferent arteriole. It shoots out under pressure, but it doesn't shoot out under pressure out of the afferent arteriole. It just comes shooting out into the glomerulus and into the Bowman's capsule. So it's not blood. Remember, the blood cells still travel through. They're not going to make it. They're not the holes in the glomerulus. The holes are too small. But all the water, that excess water that is raising your blood pressure, is going to shoot out and go into the pee. It's the same kind of similar thing as what was happening with the caffeine. So that excess water is going to come out, and there's going to be more water in your pee, basically, is what's going to happen, because the volume now coming through the nephron of water is going to be greater. Excuse me. So what's going to happen is now there's going to be less water in the blood. It's going to be in the pee. So blood pressure is going to drop. Less volume coming into the atria. The atria are happy again. ANH doesn't have to be released. So basically what you see, these three hormones, ADH, aldosterone, ANH, what they're doing is they're controlling urine formation by controlling water reabsorption and water filtration. So it'd be a good idea to make, like a table or something. How do these act? Where are they released from? How do they act? These three hormones: ADH, aldosterone, and ANH. So ADH increases the amount of basically water channels that are in the collecting duct, so allowing urine to be reabsorbed that way from the collecting duct, right? From the more water, the water can not urine, but water be reabsorbed from the collecting duct into the blood. Aldosterone increases the excretion, basically, of salts out of the urine, making the area around the nephron more hypertonic, which increases the osmotic reabsorption of water out of the urine. So more water goes into the blood, basically. So ADH, more water in the blood. Aldosterone, more water in the blood. Blood pressure goes up. Blood volume goes up. And then ANH, what it does is it increases pressure filtration at the glomerulus, the pressure filtration, which means water leaves the blood volume goes down, blood pressure goes down. Urine volume goes up. Urine pressure is not a thing. So that's good. And then there's some questions about diet. So, also, I don't know why there's a question about diseases in the review questions that I pulled. I'm not sure why it is about diabetes, but it's an interesting one. So one of the ways that you can tell somebody has diabetes, because what happens is insulin, if you suffer from diabetes, you basically have trouble with insulin. You have trouble reabsorbing. You have trouble moving sugar. You have trouble moving glucose. What insulin does is it's like a button that activates proteins in cell membranes, integral proteins that transport sugar. That's what it does. It basically, when insulin is in the blood, what happens is all it helps your tissue cells absorb sugar. That's what insulin does. But it also helps the proximal convoluted tubules to reabsorb sugar, glucose, out of the urine. Remember, sugar is lost at the beginning here in the glomerulus. It's lost, and then right away at the proximal convoluted tubule of the nephron, it's reabsorbed back into the blood. But if you have trouble with insulin, you will not be able to reabsorb that very well back into the blood. And what ends up happening is you have sugar in your pee, and so that's a sign of diabetes, is if your pee is sweet. I don't recommend you taste your pee. That's not a good idea. But you can get a test where they test your pee and see if you have sugar in your pee. The other thing that not being able to reabsorb sugar is that now the filtrate, so the stuff that's in the nephron, in the tubes of the nephron, is now hypertonic because there's all this sugar in there. So it's harder to reabsorb water out. That osmotic gradient is screwed up. That osmotic gradient here at the loop of Henle and at the collecting duct, because now there's all this sugar, so there's a solute in the filtrate, and so it's harder to get water out. So another sign of diabetes, you pee more often, and you have greater volume of water, basically, in your urine. And you feel dehydrated as a result because water is not being reabsorbed as well into your blood, so you feel dehydrated. Okay, that's it. That's it for this unit.